So good morning, everybody. Good morning. And I want to also start off with a caveat. I don't live this in my own life yet. It's a big work in progress, as it is a challenge for all of us to live this way. And it's about the way that Jesus taught us to live. So I'm going to start off with the words, retaking radicalism. I want us all to have the opportunity now to retake this word, radical. Because if you look at what the original definition is, it's something that we can all get behind. In the original definition, if you look closely at the screens over here and over here, you'll see that at the top, it means of the origin or the root, that it is fundamental. So what is at the beginning of our religion? What is at the root of our religion? And for those of you who have a mathematical mind, on the bottom left-hand corner there, you'll see the square root symbol, which some of you should be familiar with at this point. Square root of 9 is 3, that kind of stuff. But it really is about getting back to the basics, to the building blocks, to the core pieces. Not about women not being allowed to wear pants or have their hair uncovered or whatever specific rule that people tend to get hung up on, but about the core, the fundamentals of what it means. And that's another word that's gotten a bad rap recently. On the next slide, you'll see fundamental does not mean crazy people. To be a fundamentalist should be talking about the central or primary rules or principles on which something is based. And if there's one word that we're all very familiar with as unificationists, it's the word principle. The basic principles, the first principles, the underlying origin of the world, of the universe in which we live. We find this in Principles of Creation, chapter 1 of our Divine Principle textbook. But I also want to hearken back to the fundamental texts that we use. The root of our faith is, of course, from true parents. But what did True Father originally study before he gave us the divine principle? The Bible. Thank you. As a teacher, when you throw out a question to the whole class and you hear crickets, oh, that's the scariest moment in the world. Well, I guess the scariest moment is when a kid, anyway. I teach science, so I've seen scary moments. But the root of our faith in the Jeonseongyang, in these newer books that are compilations, the first compilation of True Father's thought was, of course, the Divine Principle. But most of the Divine Principle is an explanation of the Bible. And that scroll in the upper left-hand corner just means the Old Testament. But I want to focus on the Holy Bible, specifically on the New Testament. And if I wanted to even narrow it down further, I want to narrow it down to the Gospels. The Gospels are the good news of Jesus' life and works, and his death and resurrection. We have a lot of letters, there's Acts, there's the Revelations and other pieces too. But I want to focus on Jesus' words himself. I want to focus on the man himself and what he chose to give us as the core principle, the fundamental root of how we should behave. And Jesus gets depicted in all kinds of ways, throughout all kinds of cultures. Everybody that's ever brushed up against Christianity has always claimed him as our own. I mean, look at the stained glass windows here. Jesus didn't look like that. I mean, he's from the Middle East. The lower left-hand corner, that's probably him on the screen. This up here, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, tall, straight, he's the son of a carpenter. In the Middle East, he looks like a modern-day Palestinian, most likely. But he didn't think like most modern people did. He didn't think like anybody at his time. And if we had to narrow down everything that he thought, if we had to narrow down everything that he considered in the world, we could come up with a good summary. That summary can be found in Matthew, chapter 22, verse 36 through 40. At that point in time, the world of Jerusalem, the world of Israel, was a scary place to be. It was under occupation by a foreign government that would destroy the city in 70 years' time. It wasn't a place where there were human rights advocates or NGOs or anything. The Romans were a pretty brutal people. And so there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of tension, there was a lot of anxiety going on when it came to a radical, fundamentalist preacher from Galilee coming down and saying some truly scary things. And so he got challenged a lot. He got a lot of pushback. He had a lot of people that tried to catch him into making a mistake, something that could get him locked away and get him safely out of the way. And so one jerk, I'm trivializing him a little bit, but I'll call him a jerk, asked, which commandment is the greatest? And Jesus paused, and he replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. For those of you who have a really solid familiarity with the Bible, you know that, of course, in, I think it's Exodus, God hands down the 10 Commandments to Moses. And he doesn't just hand down 10 commandments, he hands down a solid 2 books worth of commandments, Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And there's a whole long list of things that are abominations unto the Lord in those books. Some of them made sense in the world before refrigeration, like shellfish can be really bad if you don't refrigerate it well. And so if you try to ship that stuff anywhere, you're going to be in big trouble. And so shrimp is, of course, an abomination unto the Lord. Other things were about being fair and being honest, that your cloth not be of a blended type. You know, you can't mix silk with wool or whatever the cloths of the time were. But, you know, today everybody loves their poly cotton workout wear. So that would be something that would be an abomination unto the Lord. God took the core. He took the fundamental root. What is the underlying principle of all these things? He stepped back and gave us these 2 commandments. To unpack them, it's just the 2 points. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And to love your neighbor as yourself. To love God is easy and hard. God is good all the time. God is loving all the time. It might be hard to reach him. It might be hard to feel his presence, but he's always there. So I also want to focus now on that second point. To love your neighbor as you love yourself. Because there's a question that goes with that. The expert in the law asked him a question. Who is my neighbor? Is it the person that you just shook hands with? Is it the people across the street from me? The new neighbors that just moved in across the street? I don't really remember their names off the top of my head, so that makes me kind of a bad neighbor, I suppose. But we have our next door neighbors. They're really nice. They've invited us over for barbecues and stuff, the Costellos. And on the other side, I have Lisa, who I helped dig out of the snowstorm, and she gave us Mega Blocks for my son for Christmas and stuff like that. So that's like, those are my neighbors, right? They totally count. But Jesus was asked, who is my neighbor? Who counts as my neighbor? Because I live in Jerusalem and there's a lot of people. Do I have to like deal with everybody who's like, 2 floors up and 1 floor down, and like, is it not stomping? Like, is that loving my neighbor? And Jesus replied, instead of giving a 30-block radius of neighborliness, he gave us a story. It's a story that has echoed throughout the centuries. In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers." The road from Jerusalem to Jericho is a very scary road. At this point in time, there wasn't solid police. Nobody had cell phones, no 911. And on top of it all, there were no cars. This was not the Parkway, as scary as the Parkway can be in traffic. I know what that feels like. There was lots of twists and turns and good places for ambushes and hiding places and things like that all along that road. Even Martin Luther King, 2,000 years later, when he drove down that road, he had a deeper appreciation for this story by being on it. It's not an easy road, but it was necessary for this man. But he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. He crossed the street and then kept going. Sorry. So too, a Levite, another kind of priest, essentially, when he came to a place and saw him, passed by on the other side. I want to note again, this is not like they're cruel, evil people. Not like, ew, I don't want to touch that. That's blood, is gross. It wasn't like that. It wasn't just a sense of, I'm too busy, I don't have time. There could have been a very real sense of fear that the robbers were still around. Maybe this was a trap. Or maybe they just hadn't gone very far and would notice another wealthy traveler and would have done the same thing to them. They hurried along. The people that are supposed to help, the priests who are supposed to minister to their people, to be the connection between God and the world, moved along. But a Samaritan, which is the word many of you were waiting for when you heard the beginning of this story, a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Wine has alcohol. It makes for disinfectant. It's the best he had at the time. He's giving of his own supplies to help him in the moment. Then he put the man on his own donkey. So he gets off and puts the man on. The next day, and brought him to an inn and took care of him with his own time, with his own 2 hands. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and he gave them to the innkeeper. A denarii is in bold because that would be the equivalent around $100 to $200 today. It was a day's worth of work. It's what you got paid when you did a whole day's worth of work for labor. So he takes out the equivalent of $200, $400 and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Take care of this guy, and my credit's good. I'll come back and I'll pay you whatever else he needs. But make sure you take care of him." So Jesus asked the man, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" The expert in the law, the lawyer, replied, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." That's hard, right? That's not just showing up and being nice, you know? Me being nice to Lisa, you know, she already gave me a present. Like, that's like the least I can do is help out, right? The Costellos, you know, they invite us over for barbecues, so when we have a barbecue, the least we can do, literally, to be decent, is to invite them over too. That's minimum. That's what I managed to do. What Jesus is calling us all to do is to be a good neighbor to those in need. And there's one other point that I want to bring up as well. A final note. What is a Samaritan? When I first heard this story, I didn't learn about this until, you know, Catholic school, 10th or 11th grade. Like, I remember hearing this story every single year, like probably every month or so, in Sunday school, in Bible study, in religious classes, whatever, you know? And it never occurred to me, like, why does Jesus call on the Samaritan, right? The Samaritans were a group that stuck around when the Judeans were taken away by Babylon. For those of you who aren't so familiar with Jewish history and with that portion of the Bible, let me put it this way. It's kind of like an oppressed and oppositional group. The true believers versus the Reformed group, the Protestants and the Catholics during the 30 Years' War. They hated each other. They were on par with, say, blacks and whites in the most repressive moments of the 1950s and 60s in Alabama. They didn't look at each other. They didn't talk to each other. They did not travel through each other's spaces. If you were a Jew and Samaria was between where you were and where you were trying to get to, you went around. That's like me disliking New York so much that I would travel all the way up the Parkway, get all the way up into New York State, then go across Killfish, and then go all the way across on Route 90 into Massachusetts, rather than have to deal with New York. I do that because of traffic and because it's actually faster that way. For these people here, they would actually walk by foot the extra 100 miles it takes to get around Samaria. And the Samaritans were actually not happy back. They were very upset with the Jews. They would not give the apostles the time of day when Jesus sent them ahead to prepare a place for him. There was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of deep resentment. But Jesus uses the Samaritan, to highlight the mercy, the goodness. The Samaritan is not helping his neighbor, the guy who lives next door. The Samaritan is not helping the friendly guy who would do the same thing for him. The Samaritan is helping the man who hates him, or would hate him if he were conscious. They are oppositional groups, like Sunni and Shia rebel fighters in Syria today, the Ukraine and Russia, North and South Korea. They are torn apart by history that is shared and yet in conflict. But he goes the extra step the Samaritan goes the extra mile. And so that is the challenge. That is the issue that lies before us today. That we're not all here to just love our fellow unificationists or to love our good, nice neighbors who don't make too much noise. The challenge is to love our neighbors as ourselves. And our neighbor is the people who give us a hard time. Our neighbor is the person who is in need. And our neighbor and his needs or her needs then call on us to do what we can to help them. For me, my neighbors are, of course, the Costellos, and of course, Lisa. But for me, my neighbors are also my students in Newark, some of whom come in every 3 or 4 days and don't smell so good in terms of the fact that they don't have the basics of like being able to afford laundry soap and bath soap separately. Those are my neighbors. Even when they give me attitude, even when they're disrespectful, even when they don't buy into the idea that education is important to them, they are still my neighbors. And as True Father says in the Hundake today, I should be treating them the same way I treat my own son. Now my son's 2 and they're 16. Sometimes it's a little disturbing how much like a 2-year-old a high schooler can act. I'll be honest about that too. But I have to approach them with that heart, that I love them because they're God's son and God's daughter, even if it's all wrapped up in all kinds of negativity. I don't have that heart. I'm not that person yet. I've seen it in a few teachers that I truly admire and appreciate. I've seen it with lots of folks. I'm not there yet. I still have a long way to go. But those are our 2 fundamental rules. If you want to be a fundamentalist, radical Christian even, if you want to get to that level, because we talk about that hierarchy, that level that we are called upon by Jesus to be is to follow that rule, to love God. And if we're going to be a fundamentalist about it, we also have to love our neighbor. And our neighbors are the ones in need, the ones giving us trouble, the ones at work, the ones who are giving you trouble at home, your little brothers or sisters, or your older brothers or sisters, or whoever. The ones in class or at play who just you can't stand. They need to be loved. And that's the challenge. That's the issue at the core. And as God spoke to us through Jesus, and he speaks to us through true parents now too, as we saw in the Hundake, we have to love them like they are our own. And if they are our own, we have to love them the way God loves them. I'm not there. And I have a lot to think about when it comes to getting there. And I hope all of you will do the same. Thank you.